Hi class, this is Mike Norton and this is my week 4 multimedia discussion board posting. So my generation is Generation Y. I was born in 1985, so I fall into the category between 1981 and 2000. And comparing myself to the generalities or key factors that identify someone as a Generation Y, aside from the age, I found that there was probably more things about me that didn't conform to the standard than that did. Uh, some of the things that were reflective of myself and Generation wise, I find myself to be confident or competent in my abilities. Um, I'm diverse and capable in my work performance and my profession. You could be in the uh, you know bare knuckle fight in one instance, and moments later you could be walking the old lady across the street. So you have to be able to be diverse in the hats that you can carry and your abilities in the performance of your duties. I do find that I conform with my generation as it comes to my attire. I like to be relaxed in my attire whenever possible. Some of the things that I don't find that I really conform to with my generation is social. I find myself to be a social person in my engagement with people and personal interactions. But one thing that I find with my generation is they are social as it relates directly to social media. Instagram, Facebook, uh, MySpace, whatever that stuff was. Um, they're social in that aspect. They tend to lack a lot of the ability to have a social conversation face to face with someone, the ability to meet and engage a stranger. Um, I myself have never had a social media platform like an Instagram or any of those things. It's just not for me, and it seems to be for a majority of my generation. Um, my generation seems to need a lot of flexibility. I do not have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. It's very set, and it's set in stone, and it's not like I can decide I don't want to go to work that day and just make it up another day. I have a responsibility, and I need to be there when I'm set to be there. Um, One of the considerations in the PowerPoint was that my generation lacks skills for dealing with difficult people. I don't find that I lack skills in dealing with difficult people. Um, Part of my job requires that I deal with difficult people literally every day, and I find that you have to adjust and adapt to the person that you're dealing with. You can't deal with all difficult people the same. Everyone has different needs, and I find that I'm able to do that at work. My generation's motivated by personal life. I'm not in my profession, as with many public sector professions. Um, it's you manage your personal life, but you find yourself working birthdays, Christmas, holidays, and if you're just tied up on the fact that Christmas needs to be celebrated on December 25th and cannot be celebrated on the 26th or the 27th, it makes it hard for you. So I'm not necessarily motivated by my personal life. I enjoy my life outside of work, but I structure it on the time when I can, and it doesn't make or break me that I have to work a Christmas or a New Year's or anything like that. Um, According to the slides, it was also saying that retention for my generation is personal relationships. For me, that's also not the case. I just left my previous employer after being there 12 years. Built a lot of great relationships that I'll maintain throughout my life. But I had to make a decision that was in the interest of my family and career longevity in my profession. Although personal relationships were nice, it was not a factor in retaining my employment at my last agency. So in my coworkers' generation, I chose to do the traditionalist. Working in law enforcement, we have the opportunity to work with a lot of great volunteers, whether that be our chaplains or our volunteer patrols or volunteers in the office, whatever it may be. I found that the PowerPoint lecture was pretty spot on with all my experience in working with traditionalists. I find that uh, majority of all our volunteers that fall into that traditionalist age range are dedicated. If they're there and they need to be there at 7 o'clock, they're there at 6:30, waiting for the doors to open. They respond well to leadership, especially when we have an organization that's very strong on chain of command. They respect the chain of command, they follow that chain of command, and they look and seek for that engagement with their coworkers and responding to the leadership that they're given. They are very formal in their attire, although most of our volunteers wear a uniform. Um, Most of my coworkers, we show up to work in our gym shorts, board shorts, sweatpants, whatever, and we get suited up. They will respond to work either in their uniform or in slacks and a dress shirt, and then change into their uniform. One thing that I did also find with our traditionalists, they do punch in and punch out. They are there to work when it's their set time to work, and when it's time to go home, they are gone. Which is an unfortunate situation with some of our volunteers, is we need them for call outs, traffic collisions, critical incidents in the city, and sometimes it is difficult to find them when we need them at 10 o'clock at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, because they want to volunteer, but they want to do it on a set platform when it works for their schedule, and they can put their personal life around that. Unexpected incidents, they're not necessarily always the strongest in that area. And they do like to work in groups. I found that to be extremely true. A lot of times we'll have husband and wife combos, friend combos. They want to be working with one another, and they'll do whatever they can to make sure that they get assigned together and they can stick together and work with one another. Now, in managing these different generations, a lot of agencies are smart and they have specific managers that are directed to manage your volunteer groups and then the rest of your staff, because they recognize the different needs of your volunteer groups. They have different needs than the majority of the department, and they're not necessarily going to be motivated by pay or getting a promotion or anything like that. But in looking at the management of different generations, I think that the management of the generations needs to be as diverse as the workforce. If you have all 20-year-olds working for you, there's not a big need to find out how the different generations need to be managed, because you're just managing one generation. But in reality, that's never the case. Usually we have a different varying age groups working within the organization, and so we do need to consider some ways that we can motivate and manage these employees. And as a supervisor of multiple generations in a public sector agency, I think a way to develop management strategies is to get to know your people and to get to know what it is that they want and that they desire, and that'll aid you in managing them. For example, here we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that that can be addressed throughout the generations and figure out what are the basic drives as ability for them to pay for food or housing. That may be important to the 22-year-old, public sector employee, but it's not going to be necessarily as important to the volunteer, because they're not there to pay for their basic housing and food needs. As with the physical and physiological safety, such as job security, the volunteer, they want to be there, they want to be secure in their position, but they know they're not going to get fired. I mean, it's usually takes something pretty egregious for them to get fired, because they're there for free, and they know that, and they want to be there, so they're not usually doing things that would put them in a position to get fired. Um, a big factor for your volunteers is they want that belonging, such as friendships with peers and supervision, and I think that also goes with all members of the organizations, regardless of age. I think all want self-esteem and self-recognition of a job well done, and that's one of Maslow's hierarchy needs that can be you know works through all the generations. I think also the self-actualization is something that's important to all members, regardless of what generational group that they fall into. And in considering Room's expectancy theory of motivation, I think it's important to recognize that people pursue outcomes to the extent that they are valued and feasible. So when you have your volunteer force, for example, as we discussed earlier, um, they are going to work within the parameters as to what they can accomplish, um, and what's something feasible and practical for them to do. They're likely not going to work a 14-hour shift as maybe your other paid employee would be willing to do such, because they're going to get compensated for doing that. And lastly, in looking at the management by objectives, I think that kind of correlates and relates throughout the generations, um, where everyone kind of wants to be told, tell me what's expected of me in advance, give me the resources to get it done, and give me feedback on the work that I'm doing, and where I stand in my work, and reward me my accomplishments. The one area that probably differs the most is when we're comparing our traditionalist generation. Um, they don't necessarily want to be left alone as much as possible. They're there for they want to contribute, but a lot of the reasons why they're there is they want the engagement. So whether it's with you or the public, they don't want to be left alone as much as possible when they're doing their job. They want to engage with you and do the job with you, not necessarily for you. All right. Well, that is the conclusion. I went a little over on this one. Hope you enjoy it, and I look forward to watching your guys' videos.